Okay, so we started a new sugya last week, and I thought that it might be best just to go over that Mishnah and the Gemara because it's going to start a new subject, and this way everybody will be, remember, and with Chazara we can do that. So let's start on. We're going to be on Sam Daled on the base. There's a Mishnah, and what I said just briefly last week, which we're going to see now, is that this takes ribbis to a new dimension, because we've been talking about sort of ribbis with produce, with food, with different things, and this is taking us further afield, and maybe people don't realize, if it's not money or something that's food or something, some object that is close to us, that's ribbis. Okay, we get it, but now we're going to think a little laterally of ribbis in a different context. So that's what this Mishnah is going to start. So let's start with the Mishnah again. Amalba es chavero. I lend you money. Simple. Okay? Can't take interest, can't do it. Okay? We know all of that. Lo yoder b'chatzero chinam. So the Mishnah says that if you have a vacant apartment, whatever it happens to be, I cannot live in that apartment for free. Now, why not? And it seems that if we understand ribbis, it'll immediately come to us because that will look like a benny. And a benny is ribbis. So if you're going to let me stay there, even though there's no money transfer, there's nothing like that, you can't do it. And not only that, you can't rent it for less than the fair market value. So if the market value is $100 a night, and I rent it for $50 a night, that looks like ribbis. It looks like I'm getting a benny because I lent you the money. And that's important because we're going to see in the Gemara how this all interfaces if I don't lend you money and what happens later. So just a heads up on that. But so again, anything that is tied to a loan, and look how severe this is, anything tied to a loan, post the loan that could look like it's giving an advantage already gives rise to ribbis. And that's, there's a concern, right? Mipnei shehu ribbis, says the Mishnah, because this is ribbis. And again, we're talking about ribbis d'oraisa, not ribbis d'Rabbanan, because ribbis d'oraisa is flatly, I lend you and you repay me more than I lent. So a discount or a free night that's as much as giving you 10% or giving you money on top of the loan. So this Mishnah then now opens up a different venue for us to think about ribbis, because now we have to be careful the way we behave with someone with whom we've interacted in a loan. You got to think twice before you do anything. Okay, good idea. Think twice. Okay, I can do this, or I can't do this.
Rabbi, just to clarify,
go ahead, Michael.
Just to clarify, if it's a gift, it's okay.
If it's a gift, it's okay. Correct.
Under any circumstance, it's a gift, it's okay.
Yes, right. So a gift takes it out of the Indian of paying for the loan. A gift I can give to someone anytime. So that shouldn't change. But if as a result of the loan, there is some payback, some advantage, that, again, it could appear to be ribbis or it is ribbis. So we'll see, the Gemara will explain that to us. But yes, then we're in the territory of ribbis. So now, so that's the mission. Says the Gemara, Rav Yosef, Baim Yomi, Rav Nachman. Rav Yosef, in the name of Rav Menyumi, says in the name of Rav Nachman, Afal Pi Amru, even though the Chachamim have said, Ador b'chotza chavero shalom edato, that, and we talked last week about, you own an apartment building, you're going to Eretz Yisrael for Yom Tov, the apartments are empty, and I'm going to take one of the apartments to be near shul. Okay, so if I live in your chaver chotzer, meaning your property, shalom midato, and you don't even know because you left town, Ein tzorach lahalos lo schar. He does not have to give him schar, meaning he doesn't have to pay him for the use of that property. And this falls into the category of what we said is zenene v'zelo chosef. What does that mean? I have gotten a benefit because I'm living there and it's close to a shul or wherever I want to be, and you have no loss. No one's breaking down your door to rent the apartment. The apartment is empty. Let's just assume that I'm not going to use anything, food or other things in the apartment. Let's say I just want a place to sleep. So zenene v'zelo choser trumps. I mean, that's a very important mitzvah. So, because otherwise it's considered midas Sodom, because you become a member of the Sodom tribe if you don't give someone the benefit that doesn't cost you anything. That's the key here. It doesn't cost you anything. So he says in the name of Rav Nachman that you don't have to pay. Okay, but in that same passage he says halvo v'dor b'chatzero. But if I make you a loan and then I move into his apartment and it's a vacant apartment and I move into the apartment, but I've made a loan, okay, red flag, made a loan. Anytime that we're talking about a loan, it's already a red flag to think about what we're doing. Then says, they said in the name of Rav Nachman, tzorech lahalos lo schar. You have to pay rent, even though there's no downside to the owner. In other words, we don't say zenene v'zelo choser once it's tied to a loan. That's why I said before, once you make the loan, you got to look every direction, north, south, east, west. What am I doing here with this fellow that could possibly be considered ribbis? Because if you have an appearance of ribbis, more likely than not it is ribbis. So that's the statement of Rav Nachman. Stamazoi, it's zenene v'zelo choser. Don't have to worry about it. Especially, I mean, if the guy gave you permission, it's one thing, but here he left town, didn't give you permission. The teretz is zenene v'zelo choser. But once a halva is involved, a loan, then that raises the red flag. And if I stay there, even if you left town, you went to Eretz Yisrael, you're not here, I have to pay you after the fact. I have to tell you, look, I stayed in your place. I know you charge $100 a night. I'm paying you $100 a night. I didn't get your permission beforehand, but you weren't here and there was no one else banging down the doors. So that's not considered ribbis. The guy may say, don't do it again or whatever, but in retrospect, it's not ribbis because, I don't want to get into this issue, but is it Genevas Das? Did he deceitfully take advantage of the fellow? Maybe the guy doesn't want to rent it out. He wants it vacant. He doesn't want to rent it out. But that's not a ribbis issue. Okay, we may have other issues, but it's not a ribbis issue. So, but if you do a halva, then it already becomes a ribbis issue. So now that's the statement of Rav Nachman. Correct the Gemara. Michael Mashmalon. Rav Nachman was an Amora, so he knew of this Mishnah. He knew what the Mishnah said. So we always say that when an Amora makes a pronouncement, it's very, very important, but it has to line up with a Mishnah or a Manda Amr. It could be a Machlokes in a Mishnah, and you hold like one of the parties of the Machlokes, that's fine. But you can't just say, okay, I'm sitting out a parameter, I'm sitting out an edict here, and then the next thing you know, wait a minute, what are you being mechadish? The Mishnah already says it. So this is the kasha. My komash malon, we have it in a Mishnah. Tanya, Amalva Escavera. If someone lends money to his friend, lo yoda b'chatzera, right? Then the Mishnah says he can't live in the chutzner without paying money. He has to pay money. And he can't pay below the market. That's our Mishnah. So what is the chiddush here that he's saying? Because in the seifa of this statement, in the second half of the statement of Rabbi Nachman, he says, so okay, that's in other words, that's what the Mishnah says. So it's ribis, therefore, he's trying to understand what Rav Nachman is being mechadish. So we're going to see in a minute, again, this is what the Gemara will always do, is to understand, sure, I mean, Rav Nachman wouldn't have said it. Of course not. He knows it's a Mishnah. But on the face, it looks like the same. So we asked the Kasha, but now the Kiddush, what's more important is the teretz, because Rav Nachman is going to explain to us sort of a different level here of what the Mishnah is saying and why he has to say it. Says the Gemara, Imi Masnissen, if we didn't have Rav Nachman, we just had the Mishnah, which we just said, it's pretty straightforward. Hava Amina, I would have said, Hanamili Bechotza de Kaimala Agra. You know what? This whole scenario is about a property for rent. I have apartments and I rent them out. That's my business, right? He's saying this is what we would have thought. Hava Amina, I would have thought from the Mishnah, we're talking about property that has a for rent sign, V'gaver the Ovid Lameger, and I'm a person, or the person is I don't have, maybe I'm from out of town, so I don't have a place here. So I'm looking for a place to rent. So the Mishnah is telling us you both have a place that's available and a person who wants to rent. So you have two parties engaged who want this transaction. So that's what I would have thought. So then the Mishnah tells us, you know what, that I can't rent for free and I can't rent below the market because there is a market. You're in the market of renting. And if I'm going to lend you money and you're in the market of renting and either give it to me for free or below market, that's ribis because you're getting more than, in other words, the exchange is more than what you gave out. And that's ribis. That's classic ribis. So that's what the Mishnah would tell us on the face of it. Avo, chotza de lo kaima. Remember that in the first half of Rav Nachman's explanation, he says, mechotza chaver shlo medato. In other words, the guy doesn't even know because he doesn't have it on the market. It's not on the market. I have an apartment building. I have empty apartments. I'm going to Eretz Yisrael, and I want to leave them empty. So I would have thought, avachotzer de lo kaima, but a property that is not in the market to rent, the gavra of the maker, and this fellow it's a one-off. He's not out there always looking for a place. It just happens one time he needs a place. So you can't say that he's a regular renter. So he's not a regular renter, and the apartment isn't on the market. Then what's the big deal? Aim low. I would say in such a case there is no ribis because, again, so Rav Nachman is coming to Mechadesh that yes, in such a case it's not ribis. Aim low. Mamash Malon. Therefore, Rav Nachman tells us no, that ribis overrides everything else, and he has to pay. He has to pay, even though the fellow didn't even know and wouldn't object. Then, in that circumstance, and again, if there was a halva, we're talking about a halva because the first half of Rav Nachman's issue has nothing to do with halva. It's just someone is sort of encamping in someone's property. So then we make the rules, and then that's one rule. But anytime it's associated with ribis, the chilik is the Mishnah is talking about a case where there is a market for the apartment and the apartment is for rent. Then I understand. Okay, you can't take advantage. But if there's no market, meaning no one rents it, and I just happen to be there, but I'm not a regular renter, and the property itself is not one that's for rent, why doesn't it fall into Zenenev Zelech? The answer is because ribis trumps Zenenev Zelech. Zelech is a very important doctrine in the Torah that you should not act like Midas stone. You shouldn't have that kind of mentality. You should always look to help your friend. But when you have a loan, there's a red flag that tells you, even though I have to be a good guy and I shouldn't withhold something from you just randomly, once there's a loan, the red flag is up. Now you have to say, am I doing something that can appear to be ribis? And if it is, you can't do it. So the Gemara is saying that Rav Nachman has a chiddush here, because from the Mishnah, I wouldn't know that in a circumstance where there is no regular market, but you do it, that it's ribis, only because it's attached to a halva. From the Mishnah, no question. I make a halva. This is an apartment that always has a for rent sign, and I'm perpetually looking for a place to stay. 100% ribis. But even in a case where the property is not up for rent, and I am not typically looking, says Rav Nachman, it's ribis. Okay, so that sets the tone now for ribis. And now, again, if you think laterally, then you think sort of, okay, now I see that there is ribis. Again, the first part of what we're learning till now is actual ribis on the loan. Here, we're talking about something collateral to the loan. So now anything that's collateral to a loan, but looks like a benefit that the lender is receiving from the borrower, that's ribis. That's what this Mishnah is opening up for us. Okay, so we now have a distinction, and the Gemara tells us what is ribis, what is not ribis. Now, that's okay, so we understand that. Now, there's an Ikeda Amre. There is another version of what Rav Nachman said in his exposition. So he made a statement. What we learned till now is pretty clear. Now, let's look. There's another interpretation, and how that interpretation affects the Mishnah, or does it affect the Mishnah? So here's the second version. Afal pisha amru, hador b'chatzer chavero shalom medato. Even though the Chachamim have said, same lashon, that someone lives in the chatzer of his friend shalom medato, in tzarach lahas loisar. Again, not a loan related situation. You have a place. I'm in need. I'm sure if you were here, you would say, go take it, but you're not here. You're out of town. Still, we superimpose that and say, if he had been here, he clearly would have let him. So therefore, it's Zena Menero Chaser. But Halvini Vidor Bachatzero, here he says to him, Beferish, Halvini, lend me money and live in my courtyard. Not that he came along and happened to live in the courtyard. Halvini, give me a loan and you can live in my courtyard. You can live in my apartment. Sorech lahaus loischa. This is the Ikeda Amre. He gave him permission. What's the problem? He told him you could live in my courtyard. Sorech lahaus loischa. He has to pay rent for the same reason, because it's attached to a loan. He says, Halvini, lend me vidor b'chatzeru. He says it in one sentence. Lend me the money and live in my courtyard. In other words, I'm attaching this permission to the loan. He has to pay schar, right? Because by not paying schar, he's getting the equivalent of, let's say, $10 back or $20 back over his loan. That's classic ribis. That's ribis deraisa. So under that circumstance, says Rav Nachman, you cannot do it. So now we see a chilik.
Why can't we call this a gift?
Why can't we call it a gift? Because if it smells like a loan, in other words, if it smells like it, it is. You're right. A gift would be wholly separate from this. But as we said, once there is a loan, that changes our relationship, right? Changes our relationship. And the question of a gift, which we said, yes, solely separate from this, not attached to the loan. You made me a loan on Rosh Chodesh Elul and Rosh Hashanah. I want to give you a basket full of apples. Okay, so again, there's not any real connection
But the
between the
minute,
two events. But
yeah, but
once there's a Hava Mina, Jay, that there's a connection between the two events, then you can't disassociate yourself from ribbons. You may say it's a gift, granted, but it doesn't look like a gift. Especially here, he says, "Lend me the money and live in my apartment." He doesn't even pretend that they're two separate things. He says, "Halvini, lend me," and you know what? I have an empty apartment. Go live in it. You're fine. You'll be there. So that clearly is a nexus, right? Clearly is a nexus. If you break the nexus, that's a gift. That's a gift.
but the fact that he's saying it in one conversation still doesn't change the fact that he wants to let him live in the apartment free.
Right.
And that's normally considered a gift. Why the fact that it was in one conversation does it become something that it wasn't in? I mean, the owner doesn't intend to have ribis involved. The lender doesn't intend to have ribis involved. So why should ribis be automatically declared when in fact he says, "I'm giving you a gift. Oh, by the way, thank you for the money. But oh, by the way, I'm not going to be here if you want to use my apartment. Go ahead and use it while I'm away."
Rabbi, this is Yael. Can I try to answer that?
Yeah, go.
Okay, because Jay, I think once you have a loan involved, it changes it changes the nature of every other transaction that the borrower and the lender have.
Correct.
Is what happens. In other words, a purely innocent, nice act, all of a sudden you look at it through a different lens because it's a borrower and a lender. I don't know if you say you're building a fence around it or whatever, but you have to look at everything differently now that it's between a borrower and a lender. Whereas if you and I were doing something nice for each other, we'd say, "Oh, that's just a nice thing." I think that's the way I see it. The borrower and lender
But
relationship changes everything else.
Person
So
doesn't.
what
The
the Torah
person
is
doesn't
telling
want it
us
to be
is that
called ribis.
relationships
He doesn't have a
between
choice.
Yeah, no, but to your point, the Torah is saying that in relationships between people, once you enter into this arrangement of a loan, like you just said, it changes the environment between us. And therefore, whatever might appear to be a payback, a benefit for the loan is considered ribis. That's what we have to split off. Yes, I can give you, I mean, again, as long as there's no immediate nexus, then a gift can still be a gift. There's nothing wrong with giving a gift
But
in a circumstance, but once you tie it to here, it gets very difficult.
But the
because
intent
then
of
you can't shake the fact that he's doing it because of the loan. That's the gimmick.
the intent is not there. I mean, no. So somebody looks at it from the outside and says, "Oh, it looks like ribis to me." But the intent of both parties is to say, "We don't want this to look like ribis."
So let me ask you a question.
So
I lend you
who declares the
$100.
ribis? Is an outside observer who doesn't know the intent of the parties is the one that's going to declare it ribis? I mean,
Okay,
that's what
so
I'm getting at. The intent should be included in this loan arrangement. What's the intent of the loan? What's the intent of the transaction? What's the intent of the relationship?
yeah. So that's a tricky, line to cross. But I'll say this: the Torah tells us that this is from the words of the Torah that if a lender lends money to a borrower, and let's say the borrower says, "I'm happy to lend you, but for the use of my money, you have to give me 10%." Okay, that's the classic case of ribis deraisa. Now you're going to say, okay, because he stated it in such a way that there's no misunderstanding that he is getting a benefit. He didn't say it in such a way that it isn't 100% crystal clear that he's getting the benefit of that loan. That was the classic case which we've been talking until now.
Yeah.
Under this scenario, what the Gemara is telling us is, you know what? And to your point, you know what? If you make a loan, then the environment between us has changed. Even though I'm a good guy and I have nothing. No, I'm not asking for you to give me money. I'm lending you money and I don't want anything back. I don't want anything back. But you happen to have an apartment and that apartment is near to where I want to be. So I want to use the apartment. And the fellow says, more than likely, it's empty. Use it. I'm doing you a chesed. I want to do a good thing. As long as the loan is not attached, that's a different major rule in the Torah. But once the loan is involved, it changes the entire dynamic of between us, that now we have to be concerned that inadvertently, not intentionally give me 10% or $10, but inadvertently I'm saying, give me $10. Why? Because I'm going to live in the house for free, right? So that $10 that you would have given me hard money on the loan, clearly ribis, is now translated to be a non-monetary exchange, but an exchange worth money, which again, that's what the Mishnah is telling us. This is ribis. You would have thought, Jay, to your point, no ribis. If it's hard money and we see it's hard money, that's what the Torah means. I lend you 100, you give me back 110. But I wouldn't necessarily have thought that anything other than hard money might be considered ribis. That's what the whole Mishnah is telling us, is that under certain circumstances it is ribis. And the Gemara is saying, yes, it's ribis, but I would have thought ribis only applies to where there is a normalcy of borrowing, of renting and everything else. That's a real problem. But if there's no normal transaction because he has an apartment which he never uses, and this fellow never, he's clearly not a guy who needs the apartment. But on the one circumstance, they cross paths. Now, there was a loan involved, but they're crossing paths and say, you know what, you have an apartment. And he says, take it. He wants to be a nice guy. The teretz is being a nice guy can get you in trouble, because if it's somehow tied to the loan. Now, your question and Michael's question about a gift, again, we have to separate the event from what happened so that nobody, certainly we don't intend, Erev Rosh Hashanah, I give you a basket of apples. I have no havamina that I'm giving you something because you lent me money. It's Erev Rosh Hashanah, I have an orchard, I got tons of apples. Here, take some apples. Okay, but again, if you can't make the nexus, then it's okay. But if you can possibly make the nexus, then okay,
Rabbi,
someone might say, that looks like ribis, suffix the ribis, but suffix ribis, we say it's lukula. Okay, so if it's suffix ribis, we're not going to come down hard on you.
Rabbi, let's take Jay's case to a different dimension.
Michael, can you speak a little louder?
Yes. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. Let's take Jay's case to a different dimension. I'm new into town, and I say, God, I need a place to stay for a couple of months because I don't have a place while I'm looking for something. And this guy says, look, I have a vacant apartment. I'm going to let you stay there for nothing. So I'm going to give this as a gift to you. You can stay there until you need to.
No problem, right.
A month later, the guy says, geez, I'm short of money. Could you lend me $1,000 because I need it? $1,000. The guy says, no problem, I'll give you $1,000. Does the renter borrower need to move out of that apartment because of that? Because it's then because of Morris Iron, it's then assigned to the free rent that was a gift?
That's a terrific question. And the answer will be dependent on whether what we just said now, is it the first interpretation of Rav Nachman or the Iked Amre? That's exactly what the Iked Amre came to your question. In other words, the event happened after the loan, so there was no real thinking about it, as opposed to the event happening simultaneous with the loan. So that's exactly what our Gemara just said, that in the first interpretation, there was no discussion about rental. The discussion came after the loan, to your point just now, that it came later. Rav Nachman says you can't enter into that arrangement because that looks like ribis, even if it's after the fact. It's after the loan. The Ika da Amri says no. Halvini, it has to come with the loan. In other words, lend me and live in my apartment. So the Ika da Amri is much more restrictive. The first interpretation of Nachman speaks exactly to your question. What happens if you and I have enter into a business agreement? No problem. And then again, a couple months, whatever it happens to be, I come to the apartment and you don't have anybody for the apartment. Then so there is, again, it's a little tricky because you might say, well, he's giving him a gift, okay? So and a gift doesn't really apply. But Rav Nachman is saying that in any event, what these two fellows have done smacks of ribis, because the only reason why he let him stay for free is a payback for the fact that he gave him the loan. That's what it appears to be. He wouldn't otherwise give him for free. Now, you can argue, perhaps, that if this fellow has a apartment building and he says, anybody who needs a place, come to me. In other words, he's not being specific to the lender. He's saying to anybody, basically, my building is open to you. I'm a Baal Chesed. I have the ability to let people stay. It's a centrally located building near shuls and everything else. You need a place, come and stay. That might be interpreted differently as a gift because it's not miyuchad to the lender. It's for the whole klal, for the whole congregation. But if it's miyuchad to the lender, because he says, yes, you can come and stay by me, and you don't have to pay me rent or pay me half the rent, then again, the reason for all of this, as we've said many a time, is, and we see this from the different machlokes between Nachman and Yehuda, is that ribis is a pretty powerful thing that we don't want to enter into. Now, the whole point of ribis was, I shouldn't take advantage of you. These circumstances don't look like taking advantage, right? They don't look like taking advantage because it's an empty apartment. And he's not worried about it. So that doesn't look like classic ribis, but the Gemara is telling us it is ribis.
But Rabbi, so I want to be a good guy, and the first act, the first thing he needed was a place to live. Then he needed money, for food and stuff. So the teretz is, I guess, if you wanted to make a second gift of $1,000 instead of lending it to him, you could make a second gift, and that would be okay.
100%.
But the fact that you've already given by giving him a place to live for nothing, and you want him to have to repay it, the loan, so you've got to be forced to continue that giving, and it's going to, so you're penalizing the person who's trying to do a mitzvah by doing that, even though his intent is to try to help this guy.
Yeah.
So timing matters, and the Morris iron of, well, I think it's connected to this because otherwise that is overriding what is the essence of trying to help a fellow Jew. That really is troublesome.
Right. So you just hit the nail on the head. There are two mitzvahs here. There is a mitzvah of not taking ribis. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. Lo saseh, you can't take ribis. But there's a mitzvah saseh, that I have to be a good guy, especially when someone benefits and I don't lose. That's a terrible thing to your midas Sodom. Look how, that's not a simple thing the Torah is telling us. That's midas Sodom. So they're bumping up against each other, ribis and midas Sodom. So you want to be the good guy. What the Gemara is telling us is Zen and Zelach is a very important mitzvah. And you've got to comply with that mitzvah wherever you can. But if that mitzvah runs into another mitzvah, a lo saseh of ribis, which, by the way, we have many other cases where there are two mitzvahs that come head to head, and you have to decide which mitzvah, and you can't do both. You can't do both mitzvahs. So one mitzvah takes precedence over another. That's not new in this particular case, and that's the emphasis of the Gemara, is that ribis is such a powerful avera that even though you have an opportunity of doing a mitzvah, if it's in any way linked to the Aveira, you can't do it because the Aveira is stronger than the mitzvah. That's exactly what is happening here. And the Chiddush here, I mean, there's two interpretations in Reb Nachman to tell us that neither works, not before and not after. In the case of before, you make the loan, now you can't do it. In the case of after, it's the Ikad Amre is absolutely clear that the loan was tied to the living arrangement. So that's the Ikad Amre. But the original interpretation, they were not connected immediately. It only happened after the fact. Says the Gemara, no, you can't do it. You can't do it because it appears to be ribbis. Now, if you can somehow, again, it's not the subject right now, but if you can somehow disassociate it with ribbis, then again, I have to think about whether or not, again, if this guy's a Baal Chesed, okay, it's not a one-off. He's a Baal Chesed and he lets everybody use everything that he has, then, I might have a Haverman to say, you know what, everybody coming through whose door stays there. It's not just you, a lender. Again, the fact that the lender gets it, that's the problem. But the fact that he's a Baal Chesed to everybody somehow may bump up against that. And again, that's a halacha question, which we can look at. But you see the dynamics here is that we're not inclined to let him do the mitzvah because of the potential of the Aveira. That's what the Gemara really is emphasizing here, is that regardless of which version of Rav Nachman you take, it's just not something that you can do. So that's the two versions of the two. So now the Gemara, and again, Michael, I mean, you could take this to the nth degree, but I guess in clear terms, once you engage in a loan, the Torah tells us my relationship with you is different. We're no longer just friends. We're no longer just people who do things for each other, because the umbrella of the loan, in other words, the fact that the loan is in the background, can certainly influence a person or someone to say, you know what, he's only getting this Benny because he made him a loan. And of course, that, so you don't necessarily have to look at Maris Ayin, but you just have to understand now, how can we get into the heart and mind of what you're thinking? In the back of your mind, are you really even thinking about the fact that he made a loan to you, that you're giving him this house? We don't know. I don't know what you're thinking, but the fact is that it certainly appears to be ribbis. And the Torah wants to create a siyah, a large fence around ribbis, and saying that, again, if I lent you the $100, you gave me 110, that's ribbis up, down, and around. So the question is, if it isn't as stark as $10 back for the 100, is it ribbis? And that's what we're grappling with now. Is the Lord saying, yes, it's ribbis, and it's ribbis either way.
Just
so now,
one follow-up question. Let's take it one more step.
Yeah.
So instead of him making the loan,
he
says to a friend, the lender said, and the guy who gave him a place. He said to the lender, would you lend this guy the $1,000 he asked for, and I will be a guarantor. So if he doesn't pay you back, I will pay you. Is that, so he's not doing that himself. Is that considered ribbis?
That's a very good question. I have to check the halacha, but it seems to me that would be ribbis, because a guarantor is the equivalent of a lender. Now, he's not a lender today, he's a lender tomorrow. So, and the Gemara has this in another place regarding a guarantor. How do we look at a guarantor? So I believe, and I don't want to say it without double checking, that a guarantor has the aura, has the status of a lender. And therefore you can't. Let me double check that, Mike, but I think that's the answer, is that since he potentially can be the lender, we already say you can't do it. It's as if you were the lender, because again, the Gemara had made an interesting distinction. The distinction is as follows in that other Gemara. If I'm a guarantor on your loan, can the lender come straight to me, or does he have to go to you? In other words, you're the borrower, I'm the guarantor, and Jay is the lender. What's Jay's obligation to recover the loan? He has to go to you? Or can you say, Michael, I'm going to Tuvia and he's going to repay me? So that's an interesting twist, is because the guarantor at the outset can be the lender. Now, he may or may not be the lender. That's why I have to check the halacha, because that may be a distinction. If the requirement is that you go to you, Michael, then, and only afterwards you come to me, that may be enough of a separation. I'm not sure that it is, but that may be a distinction. But clearly, if in the case of a guarantor, which, by the way, when you look at contracts, it's very sensitive on the language, but the language oftentimes dictates what the lender can do. It does dictate. You have to go through the hoops, or can you avoid the hoops entirely and go directly to the guarantor? That is I see it from contracts, that is it's both ways. It can be one of both ways. So I will, Mr. Shem, take a look in this. Clearly, if you can come to me, it's a loan. I'm the lender. But if you can't come to me without going to you, then I'm the derivative lender. Is that enough for Ribbis? That's the question.
My case is that the lender is a separate person, but behind the scenes, you say, if he doesn't pay you back, by a certain time, I will pay you.
Yeah.
And the borrower doesn't know that, but he's the same. The guarantor is the same guy who gave you that space. So is that a way around this?
Yeah. No. Again, it's a position that you can take. So now the question is, how does the Chazal look at a guarantor when he becomes when he steps into the picture? And as I said, if they can immediately go to the guarantor, I don't think there's any question.
No, he's a silent guarantor. It's a requirement that the borrower go straight to his.
When you say silent guarantor, does the lender know he's a guarantor?
The lender knows that he's a guarantor, but remember, so cases.
It doesn't matter if nobody else knows, as long as the lender knows.
So Shimon goes to Ruvain, and Ruvain says to Shimon, I'm giving you, this place is vacant. I'm giving you this, while you're staying here, as long as you need it before you go. Then a month later, the guy goes to Ruvain. Want
to borrow $100.
Ruvain and says, I need to borrow $1,000. He knows the potential of Ribbis and changes that. So he goes. He says to himself, I'm going to go to Levi, and Levi will be a guarantor, will process the loan, and I will have an agreement with Levi on the side. If he doesn't pay you by X date, then I will reimburse Levi. But Shimon doesn't know that Ruvain has made that guarantee.
So you're talking about a circumstance where the borrower makes a deal with someone else as a backstop to help pay the loan, but the lender doesn't know it.
The borrower doesn't.
That's the scenario, right?
The lender knows it, the borrower doesn't. The lender is making the loan. He's going to pay it back. To avoid this problem with Ribbis, he says, I know you can't make the loan with me because it will undo the rental agreement. But if I get a third party to make the loan to you and you pay him back because you need the money, this guy will do it. On the side, he tells the third party lender, if he doesn't pay by X date, I will pay for you. So I will guarantee it. But the borrower doesn't know that.
So the borrower doesn't know that there's an arrangement between the lender and a third party whereby, and this is after the loan?
The third party makes the loan.
Oh, the third party makes the loan. So what does the lender have to do with this? If the third party is making the loan.
So the original guy who gave him the free space says, because you
Oh,
can't borrow from
I
me.
see what you're saying. The original guy gave him the free space.
Right.
And there was no loan, so there's no problem.
Right. So there's
Then
no loan, but I
Levi-
get a third party to make the loan because
To make the-
otherwise you're going to have to undo the free space. So, but he says to him, you know, lend this guy $1,000 and then I will guarantee that he pay. If he doesn't pay you back by X, I will guarantee it. So so he avoids the ribis look, but behind the scenes, he's taking care of all. And in essence, he's guaranteeing the loan.
So who is guaranteeing the loan? The original guy,
The
Reuben.
original guy who gave him the space, because according to this opinion of Rav Nachman, you can't lend him as well as give him free rent.
Right. So you're saying that if there's a third party involved, that third party is now the lender.
Right. The loan is between the lender and the guy who got the free rent, the borrower. And he's also the guy who was given the free rent. The guy who gave him the free rent, because he can't lend to him because of Rav Nachman's dictum, says, you know what, I'll get somebody else to lend you the money because otherwise you'll have to vacate my premises. And so here's a lender who will lend you money and you'll pay him back. The borrower only deals with that third party for the loan, and he deals with me for the free rent. Then he says to him, behind the scenes, it's, if he doesn't pay you, I'll guarantee the loan.
So if he doesn't pay you, I'll guarantee it.
You're trying to get around the
You're trying to get around the ribis. Right. So you're suggesting that that this scenario may not be ribis because it's not between the owner of the building and the person renting, the person taking it, which of course is
right.
It's 100% okay, right? It's now that the borrower, the owner of the building comes to the person.
He arranges for a separate loan
and asks for a loan. Right. And so Reuben doesn't give him the loan, but he asks Levi to give him the loan.
Right.
And he tells Levi, you make the loan, but if
he doesn't pay by X day, I will pay you back.
I will pay. I meaning Reuben will pay Levi.
Yes.
Okay. So why would there be ribis in that situation? I'm trying to think.
Well, because
he's giving. Why is that a case of ribis?
As a guarantor, is he consider also lending? So even though Shimon
but he didn't get. Yeah, but Levi didn't give Reuven the benefit of the apartment. So there's no way that you can say there's ribis between Reuven and Levi, because Shimon is the one who gave the apartment to Reuven, which is completely okay, and Levi is the one who made the loan, but Levi is not getting any benefit. What does Levi?
Well, Levi's getting the benefit of that if
Shimon doesn't pay, Reuven will pay him $1,000.
You're guaranteeing it. So you're giving him the free rent and you're guaranteeing him the loan.
No. But Levi isn't getting any other benefit other than Reuven asked him to be the lender, and Levi, and he said to Levi, if he doesn't pay you, I will pay you. But I'm only going to pay you the $1,000, nothing more.
There's no ribis. There's no ribis.
So is that the workaround for all this?
If you want to call it a workaround, that's the scenario where there's no ribis. So, in other words, in the future, if you're going to say, I'm a nice guy, here, stay in my apartment. Stay in my apartment, 100% okay. But then I come back to you and I say, I really need $1,000. And you say, can't really do that. So, but I'll make sure you get a loan. I'll make sure you get a loan. Comes Levi, who has nothing to do with the original relationship between
Nope.
Shimon and
And there's
Reuben,
no collateral.
right? And he's making a loan for which he will at best only get back the amount of the loan,
Correct.
nothing more.
Correct.
Those are two completely different events, and you can't superimpose
But
one
they're
on the
linked
other.
by the guarantee because Levi might not make the loan.
Yeah, but that guarantee, hold on. The
Doesn't involve the guy sitting in the apartment. The guarantee is outside of
is
the.
outside,
Right.
correct. The guarantee is outside of what Shimon and Reuven did. It's exactly right. So when you're saying it's a workaround, I guess in a way the answer is yes, Michael, because it's a workaround. Because I gave you permission to stay in my place, no problem. And then now a week later, I'm in need of money. And I come to you and you say, no can do. No can do.
Not no can do halachically because the halacha is you won't. I'm not permitted to do that.
That's right. So, but I want to help you. I want to help you. So I go to my friend Levi, and Levi will make you a loan.
It's a time
Now.
gap here, right? The time gap plus going to a third party takes it out of the original case.
Yeah. So the fact that
But if
Reuben
Shimon knows that Reuven is guaranteeing the loan, does that change it?
No. Why? It's a separate loan going on between
Yeah, but he's saying,
no,
the same two people.
100% if he doesn't know, there's no ribbis. The question is more direct if you say that Shimon knows
right. That's what
that
I'm
Reuven is going to Levi to lend him the money. Is it ribbis because
he knows that if he doesn't pay back the loan,
that he's getting?
Right.
Yeah, but I think Jay is right. I mean, there's really enough distance between the two events that you're not going to attribute Reuven necessarily coming to Levi because Shimon gave Levi the apartment. I think that's already a step beyond because the nexus is lost.
So then why if 2 weeks pass or 3 weeks pass and I need a loan, why can't I go back to the original to Reuven who gave me the space for the loan? Why is that considered ribbis and that? It's still a separate event.
Yeah, but it's the same transaction with the same two parties. What you're now raising is a transaction, a simple situation which is no ribbis between Shimon and Levi, and then another event between between Shimon and Reuven, rather, and another event between Levi and Shimon.
Right.
You're saying that because Reuven induced Levi to lend to Shimon, that might be ribbis. But where's the benefit? What benefit?
The benefit is that if he guarantees it, that he knows if he doesn't pay it back, the loan will be taken care of.
He'll simply pay him back $1,000. He's not going to give him 1,100.
Right. No, he's going to give him 1,000. That's
But you have two separations here.
Yes. Yeah.
And basically you have to have two in order for this workaround to work. You have to have a time delay.
Yeah.
Because it would not be tied to the original arrangement when he borrows $1,000, and you have to have a third party. So in effect, it's a different loan. It's not the same loan. It's a third party's lending. So with the 2 degrees of separation for the 2 different criteria, then it's a good workaround.
Yeah, well,
But
that's what you have to
one
do
of those...
to go through all this because you can't be, because you want to be a nice guy and you can't be a nice guy. I mean, that's
Of course. That's what that was my problem.
I know that. I know
that intentions are being left out from this story. How do we ignore intentions and then say Ribbis takes over forgetting intentions? That's my problem.
Right. So Jay, perfect segue to the last piece we want to talk about now. What you just said, intention. Now take a look. The Gemara now asks Akasha, what's the chilek between the Resha and the Iked Amrit? What's the difference between the first version of Rav Nachman and the Iked Amrit? I understand the difference, Halveni or not, but why does that matter? Now take a look at the Gemara why it matters. Manda Oma Halvo, the person who said, lend it to me, without any connection to him occupying the building. If you say that that's ribis, kol shekain halvini, then certainly if you tie it directly to the loan, it's ribis. In other words, if the Manda Omer who says in the ratio, the Manda Omer says, halvo, a loan not tied to the apartment is considered ribis. It is ribis because we can't separate the nexus. Then clearly he would say, if I say halvini and use it, in other words, he speaks it out more clearly that it's ribis. So in other words, the Manda of the Reisha of the first version of Nachman would automatically agree that the Iked Amre is ribis. However, Manda Halveni, the Iked Amre, who says, I need a nexus here. I'll give you a loan, you take the apartment. In other words, it's clear on its face that the apartment is a payment for the loan. That's the Iked Amre. If you follow that rule, then I might say that a loan not connected to the apartment but happening at a different time is not ribis. In other words, the Gemara wants to understand what's the chilik. The chilik is that according to the Iked Amre, the first version is okay, but according to the first version, it's not okay, and the Iked Amre, of course, is not okay. So, in other words, the kasha is, what did the Iked Amre mechadesh that we don't already know? The answer is, well, mechadesh, that, in other words, like we said in the Gemara past, if I say that the lenient portion I'm going to penalize, then of course, later on, the non-lenient portion I'm going to penalize. But if I'm going to tell you, you know what, if you do this, I'm going to penalize. But if I do less than that, why are you penalizing me? That's what's going on here. The Reisha doesn't tie the two together, and that Mandamar's version says it's still ribis. But clearly, if you tie them together, it's ribis. But if you only, as the Iked Amre says, you have to tie them together to make ribis, then the Reisha, the first part of it, where you didn't tie them together, it's not. So that's, to your point, Jay, it's the intent. So now how does the Gemara answer it? So what's the understanding between the two? Says, my Tama, Kivan de Mikara Lavadate Hachi. To your point, Jay, since in the Reisha in the first part, he didn't have in mind, he didn't give the loan with the intention of him staying in the place, then we say les lambah, there's nothing to stop us from doing it, to your point, because there was no intent. So he's trying to understand from why the one who says Iked Amre is lenient in the first case. If I say Halveni and then I give you the apartment, no good. But if I give you the apartment and then it had nothing to do with the loan, it's okay. Why is it okay? Because there's no intent.
You separated the intent with the time delay.
Well, even if the time delay was not long, in other words, you still see it.
An hour later, it doesn't matter.
Even if it's close proximity, but not in one sort of statement, then according to this version, there's no intent. And that's what the Gemara is saying is the critical factor here. What was your intent? So, Michael, to your point, if there is no intent, then according to the Iked Amre, there's no ribis. So now you have to hang your hat on who you're going to go with, the first version or the second version. If you go with the second version, then if you didn't have intent, it's okay. If you go with the first version that says you don't need intent, then clearly Halvini is out of bounds. So that's how the Gemara wants to answer the two versions, but also gives us a sort of a modus operandi here to sort of understand, so the roadmap, intention is very important. If you don't intend for it to be ribis, according to one version, it's not ribis. It's what you intend in your mind. So that is a big chiddush, because we don't know what's in someone's mind. We can't get into your head to figure out what you want. But the Gemara is telling us that if you didn't intend it, it's not ribis.
So
So-
how does the halacha distinguish? How does Beis Din distinguish that? They have to, if this, I mean, I don't know who would bring this case because it's a case of ribis. I mean, the only person.
Yeah, but so we have to look at the halacha. As I said, I have to look at the halacha. But at least at the time of the Gemara, right? Not later. At the time of the Gemara, there were two versions here, and according to one version, there was no ribis, and according to the other version, there was ribis. Now, the halacha will reconcile. So I have to really look specifically at the halacha to see if this reconciliation means anything. In other words, can we reconcile one with the other? So it's all about your intent. It's all about you. I don't intend it to be ribis, no ribis. Now, it appears to be ribis, doesn't matter because you didn't have the intent, right? In other words, we know, and again, the halacha and even in the common law, is there's a big difference. There's something in criminal law called mens rea. Mens rea means you have to have the kavana. You have to intend to do it. If you don't, then they can't hang you with this particular. I mean, you can get a different punishment, but you can't get the most severe punishment because you didn't have kavana. If I don't have kavana, I know it. You may or may not know, but I know it. And so the Gemara says the fact that you didn't have kavana is enough to say that there's no ribis, even though it may appear to be ribis. The guy was shot, he was killed. So, but the teretz is that kavana, according to one man d'amar. Now, this is an interesting halachic question: how much kavana is tied to this halacha of ribis, which is a severe halacha? So now we have to understand that the poskim may, again, I don't want to jump ahead, but the poskim may look at this kavana issue and say, wait a minute, kavana here, kavana there. It looks like ribis, smells like ribis, it's ribis. So again, Mitzvah next week we'll discuss that and then we'll go into the next piece. But what's fascinating here is, like you said, Michael, you're looking for a workaround. You're looking for a way not to have ribis, right? So if you can find a way to, I wouldn't say trickery, but if you can find a way to do some sleight of hand or whatever it is and take it out of ribis, do that. Take it out of ribis. So a transaction can occur, but it's not ribis.
So they're giving you a way to do it. The Gemara is
What's that?
How to do it. The Gemara ends up telling you how to do it.
Exactly. Gemara tells you kind of how to do it without having the intent. Now, Michael's case is different. It's not the intent issue because what Michael is saying, we're going to separate the transactions. So then, okay, if you separate the transactions, then Levi has nothing to do with Reuven, and Reuven has nothing to do with Levi. It's two separate
there is a
deals.
linkage only in the. So Levi may not be willing to do that without a guarantee from.
I'm sorry, say it again, Michael. Love it.
Levi may not be willing to lend the money without the guarantee from Reuven.
But
So
the
that-
guarantee from but the guarantee from Reuven does not invite ribis. The guarantee from Reuven to Levi is a deal between Reuven and Levi.
It just
Shimon is
says
a
to
part
him
of it.
that you will. There's no risk on your part. If he doesn't pay, I will.
I will pay. But what has nothing to do with Shimon. It's between Reuven and Levi, in which case there's no ribis between Reuven and Levi.
But
but
it's benefiting Shimon in the sense
It
that
benefited Shimon, but it's not. Yes, exactly. It benefited Shimon, but it's not ribis. So you're right. If the parties can do that as a workaround, if that's feasible, then in essence it's two transactions. That's what makes it not ribis because it's not one transaction. But the question of intent, we have to look at the halacha because clearly here there's a chiluk between the first version and the Ikeda Amrei as to whether or not it's ribis. Because and the Gemara says meferish, my tama, what's the reason according to the Ikeda Amrei that the first version is okay? He says les lamba. We have nothing against it because the guy didn't have the intent, right? Didn't have the intent. So intentions matter. Appearances matter, of course, but intentions also matter. And so and we have to see how the halacha comes out, whether we come down hard or not. I will look at Hashem be able to come back and see what the actual practical halacha is, because again, today we have a hateiska, we have ways of getting around ribis, so there's not really the same concern for ribis that we had at the time of the Gemara, because the Chazal said this is too important an issue to let it hang. I think that's really the whole, again, it's a response to the environment. Today, maybe there wasn't as much lending or whatever it was. Today, everything, I mean, business is such that you can run afoul of these halachas every day, multiple times. So it forced the Rabbanan to find a way to get around it, just like we do with, like, I don't want to compare them, but we have a star to avoid agunas. We have a different kind of formula now, that when a party, two parties get married, they have to, again, the modern version, not everybody holds of it, but is to sign a star that will prevent the aguna issue. But that was a response to a huge outcry of a problem, and the Chachamim devised a way of doing it. The same with the Het Iska. That was a response to what was going on, is that there were too many people who were collecting ribbis and whatever, and whether they were doing it intentionally, even unintentionally, ribbis is ribbis. So the Gemara says there is a chilek. So Mitzvah next week, we'll pick up, and we'll start with the halacha to actually see what the black letter law is, what the Shulchan Aruch says, and what the practical effect of all this halacha. Anyway, to everybody, a ksiva tova, a beautiful, wonderful Rosh Hashanah. All our tefillah should be makubal, and we need a great Yeshua for ourselves, certainly for our brethren in Eretz Yisrael, for the hostages, for everybody else. So may the Rabbi Shalom finally, on this Rosh Hashanah, give us the din, and hopefully it'll be a good one. So with that, we'll stop. Mitzvah Shem will pick up next.